Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. The most recent China wave on the remaking of the Pacific. Over the last weeks, Beijing and Washington have upped the ante in their game of chicken to determine who will have sway and influence. To CrossTalk conflicting claims in the Pacific, I'm joined by my guest, Richard Weitz in Washington. He is a senior fellow and director of the Center for Political Military Analysis at the Hudson Institute. Also in Washington, we have Wang Guan. He is the chief political correspondent at CCTV America. And the Americans are saying they're going to sail and they're going to fly anywhere they want, and China can't do anything about it. Two big countries, two great countries, two powerful countries at cross purposes. Where are we going with this?
Well, Peter, I think this is more geopolitics than policy. I mean, let's face it, America is using international law, namely the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which, by the way, the U.S. did not even sign or ratify, to advance really its geopolitical interests. And here's what I mean. The U.S., the Pentagon, is saying that it's exercising freedom of navigation. But if so, navigation exercises should be conducted in a fair and objective manner. But the destinations are highly selective. Let's look at it. There are around 100 disputed islands in the world today. Why did not the U.S. Navy send fleets to the Falkland Island, Malvinas, which is controlled by the U.K., contended by Argentina? Or why didn't the U.S. Navy go to the Mediterranean, where a bunch of islands were controlled by Spain and contended by Morocco? Where the U.S. Navy did go was places like the Black Sea, when Russia regained Crimea last year, and now to South China Sea. And secondly, Pentagon is arguing that, well, it is making sure that the sea lanes are open so trade can flow freely. Well, the trade in South China Sea has always been flow freely. I mean, that's why $5 trillion trade going through South China Sea every year, and 50% of the world's global oil shipments going through that area. China didn't do anything to hinder or hamper that process.
No, there's no thinking that China has that intent, but that could be the result if present trends continue. That's the worry.
Okay.
That, so far, under benign American hegemony, or whatever you're going to call it, these trade zones have stayed open. There's been no conflict in the Pacific. That's very rare. We've had a lot of prosperity. And the concern now is that, for reasons we'll probably discuss soon, China is trying to change the rules, accommodate itself as a rising great power. Yep. And in the process, it could inadvertently disrupt the existing pattern, but not create something as effective in its place. So if you start building artificial islands, you start exacerbating the disputes, then shippers will be reluctant to use them. I mean, you could just imagine, even, I'm sure it's not China's intent, but just the result could be disrupting those vital sea lanes.
America always ridicule and tease about China's historical claims on those islands in South China Sea, and they think that, oh, the Chinese talk about history too much. Well, here's the thing. All countries have historical basis to claim the areas, the territories it claims today, including the United States. Let's think about it. Let's not forget, in 1893, U.S. diplomat John Stevens helped overthrow the Kingdom of Hawaii and then incorporate it as a state. And in 1898, after U.S.-Spanish War, the U.S. got Puerto Rico and Guan from Spain. And then in 1889, the U.S., through a military operation, occupied the island of Samoa. If China ignores those historical bases on sovereignty and Russia send fleets to within 12 nautical miles of those islands, how would America think and feel?
Washington and Beijing, I mean, they both see themselves as being in the right, and the other one has to adjust to the other. And this is where we're getting trouble, because that's a recipe for conflict and not for negotiation.
I imagine that's part of it, but of course what they want is different. In fact, the Chinese have indicated they were open to some kind of spheres of influence agreement. They said, we'll have the Western Pacific and U.S. can have the Eastern Pacific, and then that will solve the problem. But the problem is the countries that would fall in that area, Japan, Taiwan, which is not a country, but sort of in that same kind of area, the Philippines, others don't really want to be part of a Chinese sphere of influence. They kind of like a balance. They don't want to get into conflict with China. They don't want to be an American sphere of influence. They kind of like it when they can be in the middle and benefit from good political and military relations from both. The thing is, China's changing. That's the problem. China is changing. It's, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they could make a territorial agreement with Russia, in which they talk about win-win, compromise. They basically, Russia and China both made concessions. Now they're less inclined to that. You don't hear about, well, let's make a deal and it's more, basically what we just heard. It's, these are ancient tiny territories. They belong to us. We'll preserve them open for everybody. We won't militarize them, but they belong to us. So it's a harder issue to deal with now.
The gist of the problem is U.S. thinks that it must return to Asia to contain China because over the past 70 years, the message, the story of China being this evil communist country has been really selling. This communist China fear-mongering was behind the U.S. policies because, after all our policies originate from ideology and ideas. Well, if you think about in the 60s when, in the 50s, the McCarthyism to the President Kennedy's domino effects theory about communism fear-mongering, all the way to the present day, those ideology still affects U.S. foreign policy that painted and framed China as this aggressive communist country that the U.S. has to contain, has to do something about it. That is really the undercurrent of the current U.S. policy. And we believe that that is false. Of course, domestically in China, mistakes were made. The Cultural Revolution was horrible. But externally, China is not an aggressive country. When can you think of a country? Can you think of one country that overseas colony that China established? Or, in fact, the last time China was in a real war was 1979 against Vietnam. In 40 years, China fought one war. How many did the U.S. fight?
Oh, quite a few there. Richard, we're rapidly running out of time here. I want to go back to this kind of precedent here. I mean, I don't think the United States wants to get in a shooting war with anybody in the Pacific, okay? But at the same time, it does have this pivot here.
Yes, just to clarify with the pivot, or technically it's called the rebalance to Asia, it's less that the U.S. is increasing its military strength in the Pacific than it's cutting back everywhere else, and so the percentage of forces left in the Pacific is rising. I mean, but I would agree with the previous point that China, it's been unusual. I mean, normally when a great power rises, you think of Germany, Japan, others, they try, they're willing to go much more aggressively to restructure the international system in a way that they want. China has not done that so far, but there's some concern that this new leadership is a bit more assertive, well, maybe a lot more assertive, less willing to make compromise, and is crossing a lot of red lines that we haven't seen before.
Okay, Richard. Okay, on that point there, gentlemen, we've run out of time. Fascinating discussion. Many thanks to my guests in Washington and in Moscow, and thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, CrossTalk rules. I love you.